We take a look at the Philadelphia Flyers, their offseason moves, and more on this edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before, only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs. We are available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast. Together, we're normally discussing all the goals, saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the NHL, but we are less than a month away from the regular season getting going. Training camps are opening up. Preseason games will get underway soon. Excited about a new NHL season, but in the meantime, we're winding down our off-season previews of all 32 NHL teams. And today we get to learn more about the Philadelphia Flyers.
The city of brotherly love. We'll be getting a lot of love today in this episode, talking about the Flyers. And what an interesting season it was last year. That started with John Tortorella, ended with them being canned, and now a new era ushers in South Philadelphia, where I live.
So, let's get into today's show. We are excited to have one of the co-hosts of Locked On Philadelphia Flyers. She is Rachel Donner. And Rachel, it's good to have you here. We look forward to getting your insights on the team that you cover every day. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
We're doing real good. I would say cautiously optimistic as a Flyers fan.
Well, the Flyers are in a rebuild or retool or whatever they want to call it these days. Did miss the playoffs for a fifth straight season last year, finished last in the Metropolitan Division, and they had 11 fewer points than the previous season. When you look back on last season, was it necessary growing pains or was it still below what was expected?
No, I think Danny Briere has done an excellent job of communicating what this rebuild was going to look like. And I think, you look at the previous era, they didn't want to use the word rebuild, and Danny Briere does, and Keith Jones does, and Dan Hilferty, even the CEO, says rebuild as well, and that they've been very clear about that it was going to be a deliberate, slow process, but they were going to do it the right way. And he even said prior to last season that we could take a step backward this season. I think, because they thought they had maybe outplayed themselves the previous year when it came down to the last game of the season, if they were going to make the playoffs or not. And so I think Briere has done a very good job of setting expectations. So we'll see if what he says about this upcoming season is true.
One of the things that I reflect on when it comes to the Flyers from last season was the highly anticipated arrival of Matvei Michkov, and he did not disappoint at all, even though he did have some bad run-ins with John Tortorella with some like early season troubles. But the skill itself is undeniable. And Rachel, when you talk about Michkov in the season he had last season, and as well as the expectations for the upcoming season, what excites you most? Is it the skill, his ability to obviously score, but is it also his ability to show that there's a whole nother level to his game that he can also reach to as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we saw at the tail end of this past season was, especially when John Tortorella unceremoniously left, I think there was this whole ethos of just let these guys be themselves. And Matvei Michkov definitely took advantage of that. Tortorella said he wanted Michkov to play like himself, but he has such a rigid system and then involved. You're not going to get Matvei Michkov to block shots. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? Right. So I think that, moving forward, it's going to be really good to see Michkov play in a structured system, but a system that allows him the freedom to be himself, and he'll have all the opportunity in the world. He's definitely going to be a top line winger. It's just going to be a matter of who he plays with that I think could help dictate what this season looks like for him.
Well, one of the worst kept secrets in the NHL after the season, if it was even a secret, was that former Flyer Rick Tocchet would be leaving Vancouver and returning to Philadelphia to be the team's next head coach. That, of course, happened. Were you on board with what seemed like almost kind of a no-brainer, or was there someone else that maybe you had in mind?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely a lot of history, as we know, with the Philadelphia Flyers of guys coming back to work for the organization in some way, shape, or form. Former players as coaches, as GMs. It's been littered throughout the entire history of the organization between Bobby Clark and Paul Holmgren from the earlier era, coaching and being a GM. And I think there's a lot of fatigue around that in the Flyers fandom, I would say. And so I think there's a combination of excitement and trepidation, I would say, about the hire, just because of, again, the fatigue of bringing back so many guys into the organization. I mean, you look at the player development staff, it's like a circus of former Flyers players, right? With like Patrick Sharp and John LeClaire. And it's just like Nick Schultz is now an assistant coach with the AHL team. It's nuts. But all that being said, if you take what Rick Tocchet has accomplished as a coach, like there is a pedigree there, right? There is the track record to show that he found success with a young rebuilding team in Arizona. And I think while he had a lot better players, Quinn Hughes, especially in Vancouver on the blue line side of things, to work with, that he does have a philosophy and a system and a track record of finding success, and he did win the Jack Adams. So I think some of the trepidation goes away when you look at that track record.
One of the positives that I look at from last season, and I don't say this about many teams that are in the rebuild, is that you saw one line really develop nicely, and that's the line of Cates, Brink, and Forster. And you saw as the season progressed that they really gelled, not just in terms of chemistry, but all three of those players setting career highs in points last season. Why was it that they were able to not only form such great chemistry, and arguably that was the best line that the Flyers had last season, but also be able to have individual success as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors. Number one, I think Tyson Forster just kind of finally came into his own. And I think the system that John Tortorella had actually worked to his benefit, because Forster is really a two-way player. But on that line, he was the offensive guy, right? Because Brink was more of the playmaker in that situation. And he did those board battles, God bless him, small guy. But he worked his butt off on that line. Noah Cates was just your strong and steady center, atrocious at faceoffs, right? But could do everything else really, really well. And I think he saw the ice. He's super smart. He sees the ice well. And he was able to anticipate and just be the quarterback of that line in a lot of ways. And I think that's why they found that success.
All right, we're just getting started with Rachel Donner. Going to ask her about some of the offseason moves of the Flyers and more coming up here on Locked On NHL Game Night. You just realized your business needs to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored job post. Put your post at the top of the page to help you reach the right candidates faster. If you've been in a spot where you need to hire right away, the pressure's on, and every day without the right person's a setback, that's exactly when Indeed sponsored job posts come in handy. They'll make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. And now you can speed up the hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right, we're continuing with Rachel Donner, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Philadelphia Flyers. Rachel, just looking at the offseason for the Flyers, you make a notable trade, getting Trevor Zegras from Anaheim. You re-signed Tyson Forster. You signed Noah Cates, Cam York. You bring in free agent goalie Dan Vladar, forward Christian Dvorak. A little bit busy offseason. What is your take on the moves in their kind of totality?
Yeah, I think they did a really good job, honestly, because as Danny Briere has said, this is sort of the last year of the stagnation in this rebuild, that this is about getting some chess pieces into the right position on the board. It was about signing those contracts of the younger players and getting that taken care of so that we know that there's the cap space available to sign Matvei Michkov when we need to. And now that they drafted Porter Martone, he's going to require a lot of money down the road. So it was like important to really lock in the guys that we had that we wanted to kind of build the team around moving forward. And especially with those young guys like Cates, like Cam York, like Jamie Drysdale, right, on the blue line side of things for those two. But I think that it's a really like good position for the Flyers to be in. Now, the goaltending has always been fraught in Philadelphia. Like, you cannot talk about the Philadelphia Flyers without talking about the sordid tales of woe with our goaltenders over the years. And I think that bringing in Vladar was kind of a wake-up call in terms of like not trusting anybody except for Sam Ersson. And they don't even really trust Sam Ersson entirely because they're, he has struggled with some injury woes. And I think the way that John Tortorella structured the starts was not great for Sam Ersson's development. They overused him and then pulled the plug on him too soon in some instances. I just felt like that was kind of a mess. And Vladar played a really important role in Calgary with Wolf and counterbalancing that to allow Wolf to develop appropriately. And I think he can do the same thing for Sam Ersson. I think the starts are going to be more metered and more deliberate. And I think that'll work to both of their advantages. And then now that they have traded Ivan Fedotov to Columbus, that kind of clears the decks a little bit. And you have Alexei Kolosov as your number 3, who, to be fair, had a disaster of a season last year, but he also had random starts at random times. There was no rhyme or reason to it between Fedotov and Kolosov. Like, you just didn't know. You just didn't know what was happening there. And they got minimal starts. And this way, there's room at the NHL level. There's room at the AHL level for all 4 of the top 4 goaltenders. You also have Carson Bjarnason, who's the prospect goaltender who's going to play at the AHL level as well. So I do think that while it's certainly not like an all-star goalie combo by any stretch of the imagination, I do think the situation is better than where we were last year. And we'll just have to see how it plays out and see how Tocchet's system in front of him helps support them.
One player that I thought really turned back the clock in more ways than one towards the end of last season was Sean Couturier. But especially when he played with Travis Konechny and Matvei Michkov. Now, going into the season, do you think that what you saw towards the end of last season was just strictly a byproduct of John Tortorella leaving and him being a bit more relaxed? Or do you believe that this is just the beginning of him finally bringing back some of the offensive prowess that we've seen from Couturier in the past?
I think it's going to be a wait and see game with him this upcoming season. I think there's a lot of questions as to how the center depth is going to play out, especially because we don't really know if Zegras can play center or not, or if it's best for him to play center with this particular Flyers team. I think that's the hope, to put Zegras with Michkov, right? But we don't know if that's going to play out. And I think that will then kind of determine where Sean Couturier falls in the lineup. To me, right now, he's sort of a 2C if Zegras is your 1C, but I don't necessarily think that Zegras is a 1C. I think you have kind of a 1A, 1B situation, or 2 2s, or however you want to label it. But I think that Sean Couturier definitely felt some relief when John Tortorella left. There's no question about that. They definitely had their run-ins. And I think that, Couturier's two-way game is his bread and butter. And I think that is something that I'm hoping to see a lot more of and more positively this upcoming season, because of the changing system. And I think that, he has a real opportunity here. I think the injury and the surgery definitely curtailed what he could do in the past. I don't think he'll be in the Selke conversation anymore, but God bless him if he is. But I do think he can bring a lot to the table for this team right now.
Rachel, I wanted to circle back to the goaltending because as we are recording this, there's sort of some breaking news about the future of a former Flyers netminder, and that's Carter Hart. He is going to be eligible to return, I believe it's December 1st, to the NHL after being found not guilty as part of that Team Canada sexual assault allegations. Was there ever any realistic talk to bringing him back to Philadelphia, or does it seem like both sides wanted a fresh start, so to speak?
I mean, I never thought he was coming back. He sold his house immediately after, the suspension kicked in. I think he's been through a lot. And rightfully so. The process had to run its course as it should have. You can argue whether or not you think he should be playing in the league at all. I think that's a question that should be, looked at a little bit more thoughtfully than maybe has. But that being said, I never thought he would come back to Philadelphia. I think a fresh start is always what he would want, because I think there's probably a lot of baggage if he did come back to the Flyers. So, and we got confirmation of that from Danny Briere that Carter Hart's agent did reach out to him and said that indeed Carter Hart would like a fresh start somewhere else. And that kind of ended that conversation.
When you talk about one of the problems that was for the Flyers last season, it was their power play. It was atrocious. There's no other way. There's no other way to put it. I mean, it was bad. We're talking about one that was at a 30th ranked in the NHL, 14.5%. So
it was the third worst. Yeah.
I mean, third worst, but it was pretty atrocious. But my question to you, Rachel, is how do you foresee Rick Tocchet fixing a power play unit that was so bad that at one point you thought they were probably better donating to the Salvation Army instead of trying to score in a power play?
Listen, I think that it's very difficult to imagine a world where it doesn't get better. It's how much better will it get is the question, because generally the personnel is going to be the same. I think Zegras is the X factor here in terms of how they use them. And then I would say secondarily, it's do Cam York and Jamie Drysdale step up this season, because they have an opportunity to quarterback each of the power play units here. And, there really isn't anybody else. They've tried Travis Sanheim in the past. That's not his thing. It's just, he's a 5-on-5 guy. Now, it really will hinge on those three things. I truly believe, because, if it's the same people, you'd have to have a drastically different system. Now, new coaching staff, maybe it will be, and maybe they'll get lucky early on and something will strike and they'll figure it out. And then we'll have to see if other teams adjust. That's usually how it goes at the beginning of the season anyway. Like, teams throw out new things and then the competition has to adjust. So, maybe they'll have a chance like that, but it is definitely a source of pain for sure. And, I think that, we did a kind of straw poll on our YouTube channel about the power play. And I think people were cautiously optimistic about it, as they are with most things with the Philadelphia Flyers. But most people in our poll results said that it will get better, but maybe not get out of the kind of bottom third. It'll be like they'll be at the top of the bottom third or bottom of the middle third of the league when all is said and done.
All right, coming up, we're going to take a look at the projected Flyers lineup. We'll do that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you'd like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, we are wrapping it up with one of the co-hosts of Locked On Philadelphia Flyers. That is Rachel Donner. Rachel, I'm going to throw up a little graphic here for those watching on YouTube at the projected lineup for the Flyers, and I'll read it off for people who are listening on the podcast. But I wanted to get your take on if you feel like this is right, or if you feel like some of these positions are up for grabs potentially. And of course, we know things always change in game, but just kind of generally speaking, does this look like what the lineup should be for the Flyers, at least to start the season? So We have a top line for Philadelphia of Couturier centering Michkov and Konechny. Zegras centering the second line with Forrester and Tippett. Cates centering the third line with Abels and Brink. Dvorak, the fourth line center with Delorier and Hathaway. Your defensive pairings, Sealer and Sanheim, York and Drysdale, Zamula and Ristolainen, with a goalie tandem of Vladar and Erson.
Yeah, so I think it's mostly right, but I would say that based on our earlier conversation, like I talked about with the center situation, I think if Zegras is going to be a center, he'll be with Tippett and Michkov. I would say if he's going to be on the wing, Sean Couturier would center that line with Michkov. So it'd be that would be that top line. I would say then Sean Couturier would be the 2C, unless Zegras is on the wing. Then Cates is your 2C. Dvorak becomes your 3C instead of the 4C. You know, kind of goes up the line like that. Abels can play center as well, so he could pop in as the 4C in there. I think that Carson Dewart, who played a few games toward the end of last season, could crack this lineup there on the fourth line, and I would put him in there instead of Delorier. Delorier should be in the press box unless it's an emergency situation, as he was last year, and I think he'd be okay with that. Like, I'm not saying anything that would be a surprise to him at all, but I absolutely think they should give somebody else an opportunity. One of the other young prospects that people are talking about is Alex Bump. I think, you know, he's a very good prospect, you know, very successful in college. And, you know, I'd say he's had like a little bit of mixed results so far. He came in at the AHL level at the end of last season purposefully because he didn't want to make the jump to the NHL too soon. I think he needs a little work, but it is entirely possible that he cracks the lineup, you know, if he has a really good camp there as well. So I think, you know, there are definitely some options there, but I think a second line of Travis Konechny, Sean Couturier, and Bobby Brink, I do think they're going to break up that Cates line because of Zegras, but I think it's okay. I honestly do.
Among the players that I look at for the upcoming season as a focal point of growth and improvement, I look at Owen Tippett because he's had 3 straight years of 20-goal seasons, including 2 seasons ago when he had a career high 28 goals and 53 points. So this past season, it was a little bit of a regression, and I wonder now with Rick Tocchet in tow as head coach, do you believe playing in Tochet's system would help him elevate his game to a next level offensively, which many believe that he can be a 30-goal scorer in this league?
It's entirely on him because it's his shot. Everything else is fine. He just isn't hitting the net. He needs to get on target more. And that's just been the problem with him. I would say over the last couple of years, and even when he was scoring, you could see like his shot attempt numbers were just off the charts, but he was missing the net a lot for the last couple of years. And so it is interesting that you bring up Owen Tippett because he is a player that in the senior management presser to start the season last week with team president Keith Jones, and then this week with GM Danny Briere, Owen Tippett's name did not come up once from either of those guys. And when they're talking about a rebuild and they're talking about the future of this team, and to not hear that kid's name, like that says a lot to me. That really, I think that they just see that Owen Tippett has to prove himself, that he's not seen as part of the core of this team moving forward. Is the potential there? Like you said, absolutely. The speed is there. The vision is there. He just has to be a little smarter, a little quicker on the release, and have a lot better shot accuracy.
Rachel, final question for me, and I wanted to kind of ask you kind of a broader picture about the organization as far as you've got a first-year head coach. There's no issues there. You've got Keith Jones and Danny Briere running things. I imagine they're still going to get plenty of rope to try and see this thing hopefully to success. From an ownership standpoint, from people way on the outside looking in, we know Ed Snyder. We hear about how, he was beloved there, how much he cared about the franchise. Since he has passed away, where is the ownership situation for the Flyers? Is there a face of the franchise? Is it kind of a group of people, a company that's kind of running things? I'm just curious about where you feel like the ownership is with Philadelphia.
Well, it's Comcast and, big cable company, as we know. But Dan Hilferty is the CEO, who's the face and the representative of Comcast within the Flyers organization. As Shukri, there was a huge arena battle that went on with Philadelphia City Council and involving the Sixers and, who had the power in that arena structure. And it was Comcast entirely. And now the Sixers are a full-time partner there in those discussions. And I think that it's been interesting since Ed Snyder passed away. I think that in this kind of new management, they're not really that new anymore. They're in year 3, but with Hilferty and Keith Jones and Danny Briere, they want to bring the energy of the Ed Snyder era without, I would say, the Broad Street Bully oeuvre to it. It's more about skill. It's more about building a successful team for the long run that's sustainable, right? And they want to do it the right way. But they want to honor the history of the team. And they have an Ed Snyder legacy night every year now that they do one game a year. And, they're very good about honoring their past with the Flyers Hall of Fame and, guys that were kind of on the outs with the organization for many, many years have come back into the fold. You look at what happened with Eric Lindros. You look at what happened with Mark Recchi. Now you have Rick Tocchet coming back as the head coach. There's definitely a desire to break down any barriers about any of those relationships that may have gone sour over the years and just really honor the past, but look toward the future.
Shu, a final question for you, or shall we leave it there?
One final question for me. When you ultimately look at the goaltending situation, who do you believe will be the starting netminder for the Flyers on opening night?
Oh, it's going to be Sam Ersson, without a doubt.
There you go. Short and sweet. And speaking of opening night, October 9th for the Flyers in Florida against the defending Stanley Cup champion Panthers. Looking forward to
play
it,
them
Rachel.
Twice in the first week of the season. It's great. Love it.
Lovely.
We're going to ease you in to the season.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll be distracted by ring night and banner night and all that kind of stuff, and you can.
It's not their first game though, so the Flyers won't have to deal with that. Yeah.
Well,
I know.
I was wishful thinking. Sorry about that. That is Rachel Donner. She is one of the experts of the Philadelphia Flyers. And if you're a Flyers fan, you obviously need to subscribe to Locked On Philadelphia Flyers, get all the latest news and opinions on the team. Rachel, thank you for this. Looking forward to getting your reports for the Flyers during our Locked On NHL Game Night shows this coming season. And thanks for all the info. We really appreciated it.
Anytime.
All right, that'll do it for this off-season edition of Locked On NHL Game Night. If you want to give your thoughts, if you're watching on YouTube, we welcome your comments in the comments section. Please like and subscribe to the show as well. If you've missed any of our past off-season previews of teams, you can check those out anytime, wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube. And don't forget, Locked On NHL Game Night will be here for you shortly after the conclusion of all the action in the NHL. Once the season gets going, we are here for you 7 days a week to recap the night in the NHL. I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thank you for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.